This evening on the Rock Newman Show, D.C. Councilmember Brianne Nadeau represents Ward 1, which includes Howard University and a historically black community. We'll talk with her about how gentrification is changing the face of that community, get her perspectives on the clash of cultures ramping up between longtime residents and newcomers, and also look at her proposal to promote more affordable housing in Ward 1. All that and more coming up right now on the Rock Newman Show. Welcome to the Rock Newman Show from the campus of historic Howard University, located right here in the nation's capital. I'm Rock Newman, and it is my desire to inspire you with personal stories of extraordinary achievement. My guest this evening is District of Columbia Ward 1 Councilmember Brianne Nadeau, a Democrat who joins us to explore a number of critical issues facing her constituents, including the social and economic impacts of rapidly growing gentrification, community relations with police, reflected in her Washington Post op-ed calling for an end to stop and frisk. She's also fielding proposals to see more affordable housing made available in Ward 1. We're pleased to welcome Councilmember Brianne Nadeau to the Rock Newman Show. So, you are an elected steward with fiduciary responsibility for Washington, D.C. That's what you're doing now as Councilmember Brianne Nadeau. Yep. So that's how people see you in the news, see you on TV, shows like this, in the newspaper. But I want to go back a little bit. I want to go back to Michigan, sure, where you were born. Tell me a little bit about your early days and what sort of formed your outlook on life.
Sure, thank you. So I grew up oldest of three girls. In a community that wasn't so progressive, but my parents were. Mm-hmm. And so we grew up really active in progressive causes and with candidates, and I worked on my first campaign when I was 11 years old.
Let me ask you stop you and ask you a question there.
Sure.
You grew up as progressive, but not in a progressive community.
Oh, correct.
So did you feel and see the friction early on as a result of that?
Absolutely, and it was interesting. So we grew up in a largely white community. We're Jewish, so that was also, there weren't a lot of Jews where we were growing up, and also it was a pretty conservative neighborhood. And so I guess that from a young age I learned to be somewhat of an ambassador of progressive causes, and to really be involved. And the other really big formative thing from my childhood was being a Girl Scout.
I sure
you knew I was going to bring that up.
I sure
right?
was going to get into it if you hadn't. Yes.
Yeah.
Talk to me about being a Girl Scout.
Well, I was a Girl Scout for 13 years, which is pretty much as long as they let you do it. And the two big things that I learned in the Girl Scouts that I still use every day are to look for work and to leave things better than you found them. And that's how I do my work on the council. It's how I did my work on the ANC. And it was the mindset that I brought with me when I moved to the District of Columbia 17 years ago now.
And so you came here, you went to American University, got your master's at American.
I did. I came after college. I went to Boston College, and but I always wanted to live here. In my mind, this was the place that people came to get involved in changing the world.
So you say you always wanted to live here.
I did.
What was the spark that created your desire to always want to live here? Was there a series of things, general, something specific?
I think it was a path that I was always going down. Even when I was applying to colleges, I thought, well, maybe I'll end up in DC. That would be great. It's just this idea that our nation's capital, of course, at that time, not yet being acquainted with all the neighborhoods and the real DC. But the idea for people from the outside that the nation's capital is a place you can come and change the world, that's something that always inspired me.
You know what? I'm hearing something bigger. I'm hearing, so you're in your formative years, you're thinking, wow, I want to end up in DC because that's where you can change the world.
Yeah.
Do you want to be president?
I don't think so. It sounds like kind of a pain in the butt to me.
Let me press you a little bit. Let me press you a little more on that. One might say being a council member can be a real pain also.
It can be, but there's a lot of rewards as well. You know, one of the things about public service, and whether it's serving myself as the elected member or when I worked for a member on Capitol Hill, is that every day you have the opportunity to wake up and help people. And that is always what's inspired me. I worked in the nonprofit world when I first moved here, and got my master's at night while I was doing that, and thought, well, I need to figure out how I can have an impact in this place that I'm living in. You know, got involved in the neighborhood watch and the neighborhood cleanup and neighborhood association before I ran for ANC, and just really started to understand the issues locally. And I went on to work on Capitol Hill and still had that connection to local politics while I was doing that as an ANC. And for me, that was really the best of both worlds, because I got to sort of be a part of policy in that impact the whole country, but also my neighborhood.
You know, I looked at some more of your background, and you worked in public relations for a good period of time.
Yes.
I happen to think a good public relations person can really transfer those skills to a number of other disciplines. What did working in that world of public relations do for you, and how has it helped you frame what you do as a council member?
So what I loved about working in PR was that most of my clients were nonprofit organizations, and I got to help people who were doing really good things figure out how to get the message out. How to talk about what they were doing in a way that people understood. And it's something that I actually struggle with as a council member, ironically, because I hate talking about myself and what I'm doing. I like to just talk about how we're all working together and what's getting done. So it's a useful skill set in the sense that it helped me understand how to connect with people on another level. You know, even though that's the kind of thing I've been doing all my life, whether it's door to door selling Girl Scout cookies or out in community just getting to know my neighbors. But I think it just adds another layer, I think, when you have more of a professional opportunity to connect with people that way. So
when you ran for council, you encountered some of the rough and tumble of politics. I remember Bill Clinton saying at some point when Obama was running against his wife Hillary, and I think Obama had some complaint about some criticism, and Bill Clinton said, you know, this is a contact sport. Well, you ran against longtime council member Jim Graham.
I did.
And DC politics, for the most part, they're relatively civil when you look at other parts of the country.
Sure.
But you guys, you know, threw a few blows.
Sure.
What did that first experience and sort of understanding, having to come face to face with politics being a contact sport, what did that teach you? What did that whole experience teach you?
Well, you know, also having been on the ANC before I ran for council, I had to spend some time doing the work to understand how to focus. You know, when people are hurling things at you or they're angry, just understanding that from the constituent side, you know, that's a person in need that's upset, but it's not really about me, right? So that was one thing I had to learn, was how to sort of cut through that and say, how can I help this person who's so angry right now? Now, when it comes to candidacy and going head to head with an incumbent or another candidate, for me it was just about remaining focused on the goal, which was to ensure we had somebody representing Ward 1 that was really focused on that work. Obviously there was a lot of drama in that campaign, right? And I think the best way someone described it to me was that I was fighting fire with water. And so just trying to remain cool and calm and focused on the things that I came to say. And that, I think, is good advice for life, because you never know what's going to come at you.
Okay, so your desire for public service, your campaign, obviously you won. So let's talk about Councilmember Brianne Nadeau's priorities. If you would rate or rank your top 3-4 priorities
Sure.
as a council member.
Housing, education, and then neighborhood development. And when I say that, I mean, supporting our small businesses and ensuring that we have all the resources we need in community.
Yeah. So it didn't surprise me at all, doing a little research, that housing came out, was your first one.
Yeah.
And there has been an emphasis that you have placed on affordable housing.
Yeah.
So if you could share with me and the viewing audience here, what was it that instigated your interest in being so focused on affordable housing for the District of Columbia?
When I first ran for council, I knocked on thousands of doors and had conversations with people on their doorstep about the issues that they cared about most. Even people who were not directly in need of affordable housing raised it as an issue, which I think is a beautiful thing in Ward 1. We have a whole range of income levels, but if you poll people, which I have, as you can imagine, the top 2 issues they always say are affordable housing and education, or education and affordable housing. And that's because the need is so great. And it wasn't a surprise to me, because of course it's a conversation that's been going on a long time in the District of Columbia, but I'm really glad that I now have the opportunity to do something about it, because it is something that so many people raised as an issue to me.
So I'm going to ask you to do this. If there is a desperate need, and it certainly appears to be, for affordable housing, that means enough affordable housing, not hardly enough affordable housing, is there.
Yeah.
So one can point to whatever those dynamics are, but to a certain extent of past administrations, past council members and the rest, failure to do that. What has been the mistake they have made, and how are you as a council member remedying those mistakes?
So I think of it a little differently, which is that we now have a better understanding of the full need, and that now is the time more than ever to be pushing for radical implementation of affordable housing programming.
Tell me what that means. Tell me what that means.
So, for example, the Housing Production Trust Fund itself has existed for decades, but it was only starting, 5, maybe 10 years ago that it was funded. In fact, really not even 10 years ago. And only in recent years that it was funded at $100 million a year. And I have to give credit to Mayor Bowser for moving that money out the door. But that's not the only tool we have. And I think sometimes we get really comfortable saying, well, we've got the Housing Production Trust Fund. We're doing a great job, right? But we need to be doing more. So we're in the middle of our comprehensive planning process right now. And that document that's the blueprint for the whole city, right?
We being the entire council?
Well, the entire city. So the mayor, the council, the Office of Planning, the ANCs, and the public. And that document is an opportunity to reflect the fact that we all believe there should be more affordable housing and that it should be everywhere in the city. You can look at parts of the city right now and very clearly see you've got single family homes on huge lots that we could have more housing in that area. And so the other thing that we often sort of hide behind is the Height Act. How it doesn't allow us to build higher than a certain height. But the truth is that even with the Height Act in place, we could double the amount of housing that we have in the city right now. We just need the courage to do it. There is, the focus that I've had has been on housing that's for people at the lowest income levels, but the truth is that we need more housing for all income levels, because right now you have people who are living in housing that is less than what they could afford. That could be available to someone who can only afford that amount. And we just need to build more. We need to build it everywhere. And we need to really push back when we have neighborhoods say, not here.
I want to, since you said that, I'm going to kind of jump ahead of what I normally would have done. But there's a recent article in the Washington Post about Sedgwick Gardens.
Yep.
And man, that was I don't know if you're going to call that an alarming article, but it was certainly illuminating of the issue that the city is facing. You have longtime residents of Sedgwick Gardens who were complaining, and plenty of people say had legitimate complaints about, hey, I've been here and I've been paying this money all this time, and now you move folks in here who are on government assistance, and they're tearing the place up, they're making too much noise, they're not, used to being able to live up here on Connecticut Avenue, and those folks who are going in there are calling those people who are already in there elitist and mean and the rest.
Yeah.
It's
a lot to unpack.
How do we unpack and reconcile all of that?
Well, how much time do we have? So you're right. You're talking about a property in Cleveland Park that in recent years has welcomed voucher holders. Now, when we talk about the affordable housing crisis, building new housing is one thing, preserving affordable housing is another, and then investing local dollars in subsidy is another piece of it, because that's housing that exists, that we can subsidize, that people can move into immediately. And one of the points of that article is that we are a housing first jurisdiction, which means we believe that housing should be the primary intervention to homelessness, because that in and of itself provides stability that can help us solve the other issues going on with people.
So let me take a fraction of this.
Sure.
So a family is homeless. There are funds and vouchers to help them not be homeless anymore.
There are not enough.
Okay, but to the extent that there is, how does that homeless family, that's someone watching in here right now, how does that homeless family go from being homeless through use of government sources to find themselves a home? What do they do?
Okay, and let me say, for those who aren't as familiar, that there are sort of two tracks here. You've got families and you've got individuals. A lot of what we're talking about at Sedgwick Gardens is individuals, so we can come back to that. With families, typically we're helping them find a house or a townhome or a multi-bedroom unit. And families who are homeless typically come through the Virginia Williams Family Resource Center.
The mother of former Mayor Anthony Williams.
That's right.
Yes, a force
named for her advocacy.
Absolute force of nature.
Yes, named for her advocacy. And so they come and they share their situation. Sometimes if it's a family that we think we can help stabilize where they are through some subsidy or counseling, we do that, because prevention of homelessness is the first priority. Right now we have about half of the short-term family shelters that replaced DC General open. So some families could get placed in those, and that's an apartment-like setting. They don't have a full kitchen, but they're really beautiful spaces where you live in community while we're working to find your housing solution, your permanent housing solution. Some families are still placed in hotels. So there's a number of things that could happen if it's determined that you need shelter. And so, that's a really traumatic experience for any family, right? Some families come to us after they've been sleeping in a car, or they've been couch surfing, or they've been living with a relative, and it's maybe not a great relationship, and they're just trying to end up, somewhere safe for the night. It's a really difficult situation.
So those people who you help get housing through vouchers and other measures, what do they have a period of time to say, okay, we are assisting you for 90 days or 120 days or whatever it is, and then they have to sort of fend for themselves? How does that work?
Well, I would say this is something that we still have not perfected. Ideally, they have some assistance looking for housing, but that's not always the case. And I think that's part of the challenge, is it's very hard to find housing out there with a voucher. One of the things that this administration has done is really work with landlords, and this is actually a perfect segue back to Sedgwick Gardens, work with landlords to identify properties where they are really open to accepting tenants with vouchers, even though legally everybody has to. But really we'll say, okay, we have a certain number of units available, please send your voucher holders because we want to help be a part of the solution.
Sure.
And that's actually been key to placing individuals in particular because it's very difficult out there, especially if you don't have a solid credit history, which most folks who've been living on the street do not.
Yeah, yeah. You know, we understand here at this show the dramatic need for affordable housing. So I'm going to stay on this just a little bit longer.
Great.
And in hopes that it will give an opportunity for my viewing audience to understand what it is that a council member does, part of what a council member does. Let's stay let's stay with this affordable housing for a moment.
Sure.
I want to talk about Park Morton. Park Morton. That's affordable housing. It's been started by past administrations. You came in, you had done a little work before you got into office, but once you got into office, you really seemed to put your head down, your ears back, and to try to move this forward. So talk to me about the dynamics of what you as a council member did, because a lot of folks who are watching are like, well, what do they even do? They don't think you guys work. So talk to me about the work that was required to get that move from concept to reality.
So we're about in the middle of that reality right now, I can tell you. So Park Morton is public housing just off of Georgia Avenue on Park and Morton. It is part of the New Communities program, and the concept of that program and the promise that we've made to the people living at Park Morton, or the people who have gone away and are eligible to come back, is that we will build them beautiful new housing, that we will build it in a location slightly off-site so they don't have to move if they don't want to, and that those who do leave get to return. The right to return is a huge piece of this. But the idea is you want to keep the community members together, because people living in a building or a property together really do build a support network, right? You have grandparents and grandchildren and neighbors looking after kiddos, and this is family housing. So the project has been promised for more than a decade. Some of these residents have long gone at this point. Stage one, phase one of the project was the Avenue, which is just down the road. There's about 37, I believe, units there that are part of the Park Morton redevelopment. But the
37 units currently occupied?
So it's a beautiful new building, and within the building there are 37, I believe that's the number, units occupied by former Park Morton residents. But in order to fully replace the property, which starts with 174 units, we have to build somewhere that has more room. So, you know, the original contract's been let go. Back in 2014, the Housing Authority rebid it. That was when I started getting involved before I was elected, but still, you know, engaged on the scene. And the team that was awarded it worked with the city to identify what we call the Build First site. That's the old Bruce Monroe School. So now that's down Georgia Avenue between Irving and Columbia. Okay. It is a huge site because it used to be a school. Right now it's being used as a park and a garden. And when it's all done, between the Bruce Monroe site and the old Park Morton site, we're going to have something like 542 units of housing. A third of them will be Park Morton replacement. A third of them will be what we call workforce housing, which is for people making about $50,000 a year. And a third of it will be market rate housing, which helps subsidize the rest. And there'll be a park where the existing park is, and some more green space on the old Park Morton site.
And you, as Councilmember Nadeau, tell me about your interaction. How do you help move that forward? Who do you connect with? Who do you punch? Who do you control?
I try not to hit people.
All right.
Although sometimes I'd like to, let's be honest. So here's the dynamic, and this is what we really want to talk about, right? This community dynamic. Now, Ward 1, you know, is the most diverse ward in the District of Columbia. Georgia Avenue itself is the part of the ward that has been least touched by gentrification, and I'll tell you more about how I'm going to help with that. But Park Morton is right there in the corridor, and so when we said we were going to go build on the Bruce Monroe site,
Yeah.
we got opposition from some loud, not a lot of people, but a loud group. Now, the way these community meetings work is the people who show up are the people who are upset,
Yeah.
right? The people
Yeah.
who are happy are,
Yeah.
they're like, this is cool, it's happening, I'm
Yeah.
staying home.
Mm-hmm.
And we went door to door talking to neighbors about the proposal. I went door to door, the mayor's team went door to door, the developer went door to door to really talk to people about what an opportunity it is for our neighborhood, and I live in Parkview, to finally fulfill the commitment to the people of Park Morton, to build even more affordable housing, and to welcome other residents who can pay market rate in the corridor. And we've gotten widespread support. The advisory neighborhood commissions, both 1A and 1B, have supported time and time again every hiccup in the project. But pushback from some of the neighbors on the perimeter about the massing, because it's a big, tall building that's going to go there, which I would argue is appropriate for Georgia Avenue. Losing parts of the park. You know, there's a lot of pushback. But unfortunately, what it led to was 3 neighbors suing us, and now the whole project is stuck in court. So we're holding up housing not only for the 147 units we've still got to build for Park Morton, but all the people that would be moving into these other units to total 542 families. There's going to be a senior building. There's going to be home ownership opportunities. We're working right now to try to create a co-op option for the Park Morton residents so they can build equity. If this is probably the most important thing I'll ever do as council member.
Okay. We want to make sure that's properly recorded. Put an exclamation point because you said it on the Rock Newman Show.
Yes, sir.
So you brought up the G word.
Gentrification?
Oh, G, the G word.
The G word. Actually, that's what I usually call it.
You know, I think when I've interviewed Tony Williams and Marion Barry and Sharon Pratt Kelly and Muriel Bowser, we talk about that word. And we talk about that word and sort of what is the fuel that goes in the tank that makes a municipality to be able to run, to flourish, to do bigger and better things. And that's developing a larger tax base. You know, higher income, more taxes being paid, you're able to do more things. That's on the one hand, that's the good. The bad is these folks who gentrify, who typically come in, generally replaced, by definition, gentrification by definition is some communities that have been long-standing, and people in those communities being changed, being moved out, and the rest. So you lose sort of the soul and the culture of what these communities have been about, and there is inherent friction.
I see it every day.
You got a magic wand, and it's going to fix all that?
I don't have a magic wand for anything. Let me tell you how much easier this job would be. But I can tell you how I try to address it.
That's what we want to know.
So, you know, one of the things that I always encourage people to do when they move to a new neighborhood is to get to know the history and the people that came there before. Because one of the challenges we do have is that some people move into a neighborhood with the impression that everything began the day that they walked in. And I'm trying not to be rude, but that is sort of sometimes the impression that you get. And that's difficult and challenging because then I end up being the educator, right? Which is fine. But, you know, I think that role as educator and historian and you know, convener is one of the most important roles I have. But when you're trying to explain some big picture thing, people sometimes say, well, you know, I don't want any political rhetoric. I want answers, you know, and in that voice. And in that voice,
and stronger.
Yes. And that's really tough because I'm the kind of person that wants to have a conversation. I'm not just going to tweet something and that's going to be the end of it. In fact,
maybe you don't want to be president.
I do not want to be president. But that's a start, right? The start is get to know your neighbors, right? Don't just call the police when you see someone sitting on a stoop that you might feel uncomfortable around, right? That stoop's been there longer than you have.
Yeah.
The people sitting on it probably have too, which isn't to say, right, if there's a crime being committed, you don't call the police. What I'm saying is, let's get to know the big picture.
So that person that you're talking about, don't call the police, by and large, that's white folks. By and large.
Yeah, by and large, not exclusively.
Not
but
exclusively,
I would say
but
the majority.
That's white folks.
Yeah.
So how have white folks responded to you trying to teach them how to behave coming in these new communities?
So there are some folks who are open-minded and appreciate it. And then there are other folks who I think I was never going to change their mind, and they express that as well. So what I've done as council member is I've tried to be as authentic as I can and true to myself and what I think people elected me for, which is to do that work, to create that understanding, to really ensure that our policies from the council are not, compounding institutional racism, those really big things. And right, how do we really know if the people are following what I'm doing? Well, I did get reelected, right? So that gives me the comfort and the confidence to know that this has been the right path.
You can go out there and educate some more.
Exactly. Because, as a first timer, you always get anxious, right? Is this working? Well, there's a lot more work to do, but I do think it is working, and I think there's wonderful people in our community doing grassroots work. Park Morton, for example, we have a contractor doing this Neighbor Up program where she's out and doing these little coffee chats in people's homes, and people from the public housing and people from the private housing are getting together and having coffee and talking about the things they care about and sharing their stories. If we could do that in every neighborhood, and I had the budget for that, I would do it in a heartbeat because that's huge.
So you talk about Park Morton, and that's up by Park Road and Georgia Avenue. We're going to come down, we're going to come past a place I call the greatest institution of higher learning in the history of the world, and that's Howard University. We're going to pass by them, but we're going to come back. But we're going to pass by them and come on down Georgia Avenue to Florida Avenue, which starts, once you cross Florida Avenue, you're on 7th Street.
Are we going to hear some?
And on the side of 7th Street there in Florida Avenue, every time that I've come up there for the last 50 years maybe, I've heard some banging go-go.
Some go-go.
And, I got happy when I crossed that Florida Avenue. And some folks wasn't so happy who had just moved in. I think some of those ones that you're talking about who you were trying to educate.
It's hard.
And they made a stink.
Yeah, they
and
did.
They prevailed at a point to put pressure on the landlord of the building where the guy's been doing this for ever to shut it down. The community rose up. And you were a part of that effort of rising up to maintain the culture. I saw the letter that you wrote to the T-Mobile person. So you rolled up your sleeves and got involved. Why did you think that was the right thing and the important thing to do?
Well, this was a perfect example of someone moving into the neighborhood and not understanding the history. So I was also on the ANC for U Street. And one of the things that I really appreciated about the work that I got to do and the people I served with was I got to learn that deep history of music on U Street that we don't see much of anymore, right? It's all but gone. And, we're trying to hold on to it, by putting up plaques and murals, but the music itself is almost completely gone. And this was sort of adding insult to injury to say, now we've got someone moving in who's saying this got to go too. Now, it's interesting because I have gotten complaints about it over the years, right? And one of the things that I always do when I get a complaint is just, let's look into it. And DCRA had come out in the past and checked the noise levels because part of it's about the noise levels, not the music itself. Let's be fair. But they'd always been found in compliance. And I think part of the problem too is with more people, let's say, working from home during the day than we've ever had, and less ambient noise during the day than you have at night, that sound sort of travels really quickly. and far. So that's, that's sort of like a most basic conflict. We have the same issue up in Columbia Heights with the paint can drummer and, some of the speechifiers. And it's, Ward 1 is so compact.
Yeah.
You really can't live anywhere without being within earshot of a commercial corridor.
Yes, and I was going to ask you because now we're talking right there at 7th and Florida Avenue. And around the corner is what the old Wonder Bread place where you have
the WeWork.
Beautiful WeWork spaces. Do some of the complaints come from there?
Not a one.
Really?
Interestingly enough. Yeah.
That's surprising.
Yeah.
Because
I think it's mostly people working from their houses.
So they might enjoy it. But there's so
maybe
folks
they
over
do,
there.
or maybe they're so focused on work they don't hear it. I don't know.
Yeah. So, okay, let's put the car in reverse and back up.
Okay.
No, let's make a U-turn and come back to Howard
I
University.
prefer U-turns.
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on back.
Okay.
You represent the ward in which Howard University sits.
I do.
So I would like to get your feedback on what Howard has meant to the ward, what Howard means to the ward in your opinion.
Well, having an historically black university in Ward 1 is an honor. And having a leader like Dr. Frederick, who's really trying to revive it and ensure that it has stability for the future, is critical. And now he'll tell you also that they're one of the largest employers in the ward. Then I can't forget that, right?
Yes,
Which is good and important. But I also think the presence of the students has meant a lot to the community. And there's some party houses, right? Everyone's going to complain about students in every neighborhood. But I mean their real contributions, whether they're volunteering or serving on the A&C. Howard, one of our Howard grads actually served on the A&C and then went on to work in my office, which of course is a huge contribution to Ward 1. But there's just so many things that the university does to enrich the neighborhood too, whether it's through incubating small businesses, inviting us in when they're holding symposiums and other really wonderful discussions. What I'm most excited about is the future, which is the work that the university is going to be doing on its properties along Georgia Avenue. And we always have this tension, around affordable housing, right? Howard needs to develop their sites so that they can remain financially viable, and I'm always going to keep pushing to do more affordable housing when they're doing that, and they know. So.
Where did you stand on the issue with the brouhaha?
With the hospital?
With the hospital, yes.
Man, doing what I could to support Howard so that they could get a piece of the pie as we build that new hospital. But also really a complex situation because there's already, the government had already negotiated a contract so with another operator. So it was complicated, but I think we landed in a good place. And the goal really is to ensure that the med students at Howard have an opportunity to train, right, so that they can be doctors, so that they can serve. And one of the things that we are always reminded of in these conversations is how important it is to have doctors who are of color, because people of color often are discriminated against by their doctors when they seek medication or when they are being diagnosed with a disease. And that's a huge issue nationally, not just in the District of Columbia. To have more doctors of color, I think, ultimately helps health outcomes for people of color. So that's a huge driving force.
I want to have this last piece here on affordable housing before we move to something else. When you say that it's exciting what the university is doing with its assets, and that there is a natural tension, there becomes a natural tension for your advocacy for affordable housing. How do you see that shaping out? What do you want the university to do or to be mindful of that would be consistent with your vision for affordable housing for this area?
Most simply, just build more. Build as much affordable housing as you can possibly afford, even if the law doesn't require it. And I say that to everybody, not just the university, because I think we're all in this together. And the people that the students, the professors, everybody needs affordable housing. And a beautiful example is the project now called Trellis House. that's over on Berry Place, and there's a good deal of affordable housing there, and community benefits came out of that project as well. And that was all part of a planned unit development, where by law the university was required to engage with the local community and the ANC to finalize the project, and that was a beautiful outcome. So it was a great opportunity to partner.
Well, I like to think the president probably doesn't do anything else on a Wednesday evening other than watch the Rock Newman Show. So I'm sure he'll get that message.
He'll get the message.
You may get a call soon.
I'm always happy to talk to Dr.
Look,
Frederick.
so as this white lady councilwoman,
yes,
here you go again.
Here I go again.
You write an op-ed piece in the Washington Post, and you talk about a lot of stuff. You talk about community policing, the relationship of the community with the police, how, sort of the reciprocal, what should be the reciprocal nature of it.
Right.
But then, you get a little bold there, and you challenge what is, in your definition, police actions of stopping and frisking.
Right.
They call it something else, but I thought you very boldly said it's tantamount to, and it is therefore, stopping and frisking.
Right.
What drove you to sort of take that bold stand?
Well, I learn on the job. And I didn't show up here in the District of Columbia knowing all of this or understanding these issues. I learned from the people that I served that a lot of the policies we have in place in government, not just this government, but all governments, really have had a deep and lasting negative impact on our communities of color. And that is really what moved me to stand up on this. I worked together with a number of groups, Stop Police Terror, the Ward 1 Near Act Study Group, and constituents who are involved with these organizations. And they've really shown me how I can use my leadership and my privilege to make a difference in these issues. So, and I'll tell you, this is another area where when you have an uptick in violence in Ward 1, which we do right now, this is a thing that some people who just don't get it will throw in my face.
Right.
I'm soft on crime, or I don't get it. Now, what's been interesting to me is I feel like all the work I'm doing is sort of building on existing infrastructure, right? We're not cutting the police force, right? We're not doing that. We're enhancing it. But I'm asking, and my point in this op-ed was, look, the NEAR Act, the Neighborhood Engagement Achieves Results Act that the council passed years ago now, that we're trying to implement this public health approach to public safety, trauma-based care, intervention rather than prison, diversion programs, all of these things that haven't been in place. The big piece of the NEAR Act is the data collection. And without the data on stop and frisk, that we have not been getting all the data, then we can't make informed decisions as a council on how this is being implemented. So my thing was, if you're not going to give us the data, just stop. Just stop altogether, and give us the data, we can talk about it.
Because some real data is that now African Americans comprise 47% of the population here and are arrested at 83%.
Yeah.
That's oppression.
Yeah.
That's a form of real oppression that comes out of what has been long-term institutional bias and so much else.
It's when individual bias becomes institutional racism.
Yeah.
Right? And how do you undo that?
Yeah.
Well, little by little, but we're trying to do it faster.
Yeah.
And so I can tell you that, I wrote that op-ed and I got pushback, no, we don't do that, but how about we ask the people who've experienced it?
And I tell you what, we have some footage of you in the council talking about
Oh
this.
boy.
Yeah, so let's take a look.
Okay.
Chairman, I intend to vote to override the veto today, and there are a few constituencies that I feel that I should explain that vote to. Aside from those who have very strongly urged me to vote against the veto, there are some who have urged me to vote to uphold it. And so I want to speak to those constituents who have written in and reassure them that, as Councilmember Che said, this doesn't eliminate the civil penalties. And also to our transit workers who I know have come here today to see us. And I want to acknowledge that I see you. And of course, we want to help keep you safe in your jobs, and we know how hard you work. But we also don't want to falsely conflate fare evasion with violent crime. And so I say to you that we will continue working together to ensure that we can uphold your rights as workers to keep you safe as you do the jobs every day to keep us safe and getting to work and everywhere we need to go on time. We are slowly dismantling an unfair system, and the more we commit to using the lens of race equity in all we do in government, the sooner we will be able to rectify the real crime here, which is perpetuating racist government systems in our own government. So I join my voices with my colleagues today in support of an override of the mayoral veto. I have consistently supported decriminalizing fare evasion on Metro here in the District of Columbia, and I hope that we can see that happening all across the country in places where that's not yet happened. So I thank my colleagues for their leadership on this, and especially for those who made it possible to have the meeting today so we could take this vote and continue to rectify some of the wrongs that exist here in our community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Nadeau, I said on a show, I don't even know if it was this season or before, that racism was America's original sin.
Yeah.
And for too long, it has continued to be a sin and an open wound that doesn't get healed with status quo thinking. And in that piece there, you took the leap, you took the risk to challenge status quo thinking that clearly is not something that a lot of those who are in control of the status quo are comfortable. That's not a conversation they're comfortable with having.
Right.
I want to ask you a couple of things. What kind of feedback did you get from that position you took there? And where do we go from here?
So the thing that I really appreciate is that the majority of my constituents think that way. They are progressive and they understand that we have to make big changes to right the wrongs of history, that this is the moment. We can't wait. And so there was really a great deal of support for decriminalizing fare evasion, as I believe there was before my time for decriminalizing marijuana use. And I think the next is to decriminalize sex work, right? That's the next conversation we're going to be having.
Decriminalize sex work. How do you define it?
Prostitution. So we're in a moment where I think white people are finally understanding, not all white people, but white people are finally understanding that our privilege has meant the oppression of others. And some people become uncomfortable giving up some of their privilege to allow that oppression to stop. That's the tricky space in my community.
That idea and concept right there
Yeah.
is as much, in my estimation, as anything in what got Donald Trump elected president.
Oh, yeah. People are so worried that they're going to lose something.
That advancement for you is a rollback of my advances.
You win, I lose.
Yeah.
We don't
If I let
have
you
to
win.
think that way, though, right? Everyone can win. Some of us have to give some things up. But that's only fair. And you're right. I mean, the racism that we're feeling in our communities right now has been going on so long. And white supremacy itself, right? So I'm Jewish, and we talk a lot now at the council and in community about that root of white supremacy being racism, bigotry, anti-Semitism. If you're racist, you're probably also anti-Semitic, and vice versa, right? But the way that black people have been oppressed is just so much more systemic at this stage in history, because of the way it persists. And that's something that I feel so passionate about. I mean, you know, my time in office, I'm only going to be able to do a little bit of this work, right? I'm not going to be able to solve it because I'm not going to sit in this seat forever. And there's people who are, you know, I'm sure will come behind me that will continue it. And I'm hoping to cultivate that leadership. I think that's part of the job. Part of the job is thinking about what's going to happen after you're gone, you know, not just how long can you stay in the seat. And I think that's probably a perfect example, right, of how you can't hold on to that privilege forever if you're really thinking about a just society. So.
Yeah. You have a 19-year-old daughter.
19 months.
I'm sorry, 19
Yes.
Boy, I grew her up real fast.
You sure did.
19 months.
Yes.
So what are you teaching her
Yeah.
to make sure peer pressure is rough, she's going to school at some point and all the rest, and she's going to be, you know, surrounded by just a myriad of people and thoughts.
Yeah.
What do you teach her so that she can follow in those footsteps? Because those footsteps that you are laying, they're important, they're valuable, they're critical to moving forward. So what do you teach her? What will you be teaching her?
Well, I love that we live in Parkview, which is still a diverse neighborhood. We are gentrifiers, so one of the things that we'll be teaching her is about the neighborhood and what was there before we moved in. One of the things that I love hearing about from parents who put their kids in public schools is how much the children learn about others just by being in a diverse setting in the school. She's going to be in Boundary for a bilingual school at Bruce Monroe at Parkview, and they do a really wonderful job there of ensuring that the different parent communities have meaningful ways to connect, so that the kids also have a meaningful way of connecting. But we love to take her out on the playground, let her play with other kids. Really, just her exposure already at such a young age to people who were different than her is so much greater than mine ever was. And I think that's where you start. And when she's old enough, we'll have honest conversations about racism and anti-Semitism and all the isms, and she can understand her role in the world as someone who has to help resolve those issues.
So, you know, we have all of this, so this means you've got to come back.
Okay.
So look, let's jump into this for a second for the women, well, for everybody who's watching. We're talking about that 19-month-old baby that several months ago you fed from the dais in all natural.
Yeah, I pumped. Yeah,
You pumped from the dais.
Yep.
And there was some noise made about that. You sort of became an example, I think, though, of some of the issues that women face. Can you talk to us about that experience and what becoming that example has meant?
I'm one of the moms trying to normalize breastfeeding, which means my hope is the things I've had to do to take care of my child make it a little easier for the next mom. You know, I've said it before and I'll say it again, nobody wants to come back from work 5 days after the baby is born to do their job, and no one should have to. And so that part of my experience was particular to this job and not something that I want to role model for others. But the other parts, the parts where, you know, I'm going about my day and doing what I need to feed my baby, chairing a hearing, running long, not wanting to recess it, pumping while the hearing is going. That worked for me.
Anybody doesn't understand, pumping means feeding the baby.
Yeah.
Breastfeeding the baby. Right.
Yeah. So it's I think of it as something I had to do to feed my baby, but also hopefully something that made it easier for, say, a council staffer who now has to take care of a child on the hectic schedule that council moves on. So it's I got a lot of applause, I'd say, from moms and parents in general who get that it's really hard to work, and you know, even before I had a kid, worked really hard on things like paid family leave and ensuring that families have the supports they need when they have children or when they adopt or honestly, you know, when you're caring for a loved one at any stage in life. But yeah, it was, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I just did it, and then it became a whole phenomenon. So, you know.
So look, we have 90, by the time I finish this question, we're gonna have about 90 seconds left.
Okay, lightning
So I'm
round.
gonna give you an opportunity to give your stump speech for those people who are in Philadelphia and all over the rest of the country
Sure.
that are thinking about moving to Washington, D.C., why Ward 1 is the place for them to move.
Ward 1 is the most diverse ward in the District of Columbia. It's where you can come if you want culture, history, music, arts, if you want to meet people who are different than you from all different countries around the world, in all different parts of the country, young, old, families, singles. Really, Ward 1 has everything. We are proud of the, especially the Latino heritage and culture in our community, as well as the Ethiopian heritage and culture. But we're a place where everyone lives, right all on top of each other in this very dense part of the ward. Beautiful parks, great schools, and we welcome anyone to visit or to come live.
And Howard University.
And one of the most prestigious universities in the country, our very own HBCU, Howard University.
We couldn't end on a better note. Folks, that wraps us for this evening. For more information on this program or any other program produced by WHUT, go to WHUT.org. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye, and may God bless.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.